My son Corvus stood in my kitchen, the kitchen I have made coffee in every morning for 29 years, and told me it would be easier for everyone if I moved into the small room off the hallway so the baby could have the room at the end of the hall. He said it gently, the way you'd suggest a tired driver hand over the keys. His wife Lilith stood behind him with one hand resting low on her belly, already measuring the walls with her eyes for a crib that did not exist yet. I did not argue. I said, "Of course, sweetheart, whatever's easiest." And I poured him a second cup of coffee, and I went to bed early. What none of them knew, standing there so sure of which room belonged to whom, was that the toolbox in my husband's shed held more than sandpaper and wood glue. It held a letter, a ledger, and a small brass compass. And that wasn't even the worst thing my son was hiding from me that week. By the time Corvus came down for breakfast the next morning, there was already a name in my phone I hadn't called in 14 months. My old friend Peregrine Doyle, who had drawn up wills and trusts in this county for 40 years. Here's how a woman they tried to file into the small room found out exactly what her son owed and to whom before the coffee had gone cold. My name is Theodora Whitlock. Most people call me Thea. I'm 64, and for 34 years I worked as a paralegal at Doyle and Ashworth, a two-room law office on Danbury Street. I have typed more wills than I can count and read more family arguments hiding inside them than any daytime program could invent. A document does not care who raises their voice loudest in a kitchen. A document answers to the words written on it and nothing else. I built a quiet, careful life on that one piece of knowledge. I raised Corvus mostly on my own paycheck because Tristan, my husband, ran a small carpentry shop with his partner Phelan Duggan, and carpentry is a business of feast and famine. Tristan built the porch on this house board by board. He hung every door so true you could close them with a breath. People who visited us over the years would run a hand along that porch rail and go quiet a moment. That rail is the closest thing to a love letter my husband ever wrote. Tristan died 14 months ago. A cough that would not quit, then a scan, then 4 months that went faster than 4 months has any right to go. He was not a man of speeches. But near the end, holding my hand, he said one strange thing more than once. Keep the toolbox, Thea. Don't let anyone clean it out before you've gone through it yourself. I did not understand why a dying man would spend one of his good sentences on a toolbox. I understand now. Corvus grew up gentle and easily led, and somewhere along the way he married a woman who took that softness and turned it into a steering wheel. Lilith is not a cartoon villain. She grew up with very little and decided the cure was to look like she had always had plenty. The apartment she and Corvus kept before moving back near us was a magazine spread nobody was allowed to actually live in. It started, as these things do, dressed up as help. Corvus told me business was slow. I believed him because it usually was. What I did not know was how slow and why. The first small wrong thing came on a Thursday in October. I couldn't tell you the exact date. But I remember the porch light was still on from the night before, and Corvus's voice on the phone in the driveway, low and fast, saying a name I didn't recognize. Pharaoh. He said it the way you say a name you owe money to. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a grown man is allowed a private phone call. That's the trap. That's the exact trap. You tell yourself it's nothing so many times that by the time it's something, you already agree to move into the small room. What I found out over the following weeks came to me in pieces, the way water finds its way under a door before anyone notices the flood. The first piece was small. Corvus stopped taking his lunch break at the shop and started driving somewhere for 40 minutes at midday. When I asked, he said he was checking on a supplier. I filed papers for a living. I know what a receipt looks like, and I know what a man looks like when he's avoiding one. The second piece came from Lilith. She started talking about simplifying my life. Not unkindly, at first. A comment about how big the house felt for one person. A magazine left open on my counter to an article about downsizing, as if it had wandered there on its own. I did what I was raised to do. I kept it in the family. I did not air it out. I told myself she was being thoughtful. You know that feeling when someone hands you a kindness and some part of you, some old paralegal instinct, is already flipping it over to check the date and the signature underneath. The third piece was the one I couldn't file away as easily. I was folding towels in the hallway closet, the one Tristan built with the crooked top shelf he never got around to fixing, and I heard Corvus on the phone in the garage. His voice had a pitch I hadn't heard from him since he was 17 and had wrecked his father's truck. I know what I owe, he said. I'm working on it. Just give me until spring. I didn't hear a name that time, but I heard the shape of fear in my son's voice, and a mother knows that shape the way she knows her own handwriting. I didn't confront him. I told myself it was a car payment, a credit card, something ordinary. I told myself the thing every decent mother tells herself when she's afraid to look closer. It's not my business. Let him handle it. He's a grown man. That's the part that still gets me, if I'm honest. I had 34 years of reading contracts for a living, and I still chose not to read the ones sitting in my own garage. I need to tell you about the toolbox before I tell you what came next, because they belong together whether I understood that yet or not. Tristan's old red toolbox sat on the third shelf of the shed, untouched since the funeral. He told me twice, in his last clear week, not to let anyone clean it out before I'd gone through it myself. I hadn't gone through it. Grief makes procrastinators of even the most organized women. I went out to the shed one evening that October, meaning finally to look. The padlock was there, same as always, but the hasp beside it was scratched, fresh scratches, bright against the rust. Someone had tried that lock recently. Not opened it, tried it. I stood in the cold with my hand on that scratched metal for a long moment. I told myself it was nothing. Raccoons, maybe, or my own imagination working overtime in a widow's autumn. I was wrong about that, the way I was wrong about a great many things that fall. Then, for a while, things got better. That's the part nobody warns you about, how betrayal always leaves a door open just wide enough for hope to walk back in. Corvus started coming by more, not to ask for anything, just to sit. He fixed the gutter that had been sagging since spring. He brought his father's old level down from the shed, the long wooden one with Tristan's initials burned into the side, and used it the way his father had taught him, checking twice before he drove a single screw. Sigrid Halloran, my old colleague from the office, joked that I'd gotten my son back. I laughed and told her maybe grief had finally knocked some sense into him. Lilith softened too, or seemed to. She started asking me questions about Tristan, real questions, not polite ones. What was he like when Corvus was small? Did he ever get angry? I told her about the porch rail, how he'd sanded it 3 times because the first 2 weren't smooth enough for a child's hand to run along. She listened like she meant it. There's a difference between being patient and being a placeholder. I didn't know that yet. I thought I was simply being loved again. One Sunday, Corvus brought over a casserole dish, badly made, the crust burned at the edges, and set it on my counter like an offering. Lilith's recipe, he said. She wanted to do something nice. I ate 2 servings I didn't want, because a mother eats the burned casserole when her son is trying. For 3 weeks, I let my guard all the way down. I stopped noticing the scratched hasp on the shed. I stopped hearing the pitch in Corvus's voice from that garage call. I told Sigrid over coffee one Tuesday that I thought the worst of the grief, mine and my son's both, was finally behind us. I was raised to believe that blood is thicker than water. Nobody told me that blood can also drown you slowly enough that you thank it on the way down. The baby's due date came up in conversation more and more. Lilith showed me paint swatches for the nursery, soft yellows and greens. Nothing decided yet, she said, just dreaming a little. I picked out a swatch called Meadow Whisper and told her it reminded me of Tristan's workshop in June, when the sawdust caught the light just right. I believed, truly believed, that whatever strange currents had moved through my family that October had settled. Then came the Thursday with the coffee, the one where Corvus stood in my kitchen and said the guest room made more sense. I have already told you how that went. I smiled. I said, of course, sweetheart, whatever's easiest. I went up to bed early. But this time, lying in the dark, I thought about the burned casserole, and the level with Tristan's initials, and the softened questions about a man Lilith had never once asked about before she needed something from his memory. And I thought about a brass compass, my husband's, the one he carried in his shirt pocket since before Corvus was born, the one that should have been sitting right on top of everything in that red toolbox. I hadn't seen it in the shed in a long time. I hadn't thought to look for it until just then, lying still in the dark, listening to my own house settle around me the way it always had, except that tonight, for the first time, I was listening for something else entirely. The next morning came in gray and quiet, and I did not go looking for the compass right away. I made coffee. I moved the good dishes back to the shelf I could reach. Then I walked out to the shed with my own key in my hand, not because I'd decided anything yet, only because a woman who spent 34 years reading fine print does not sleep well until she's checked the one thing bothering her. The padlock opened easy enough. Mine always did. The toolbox sat where it always had, third shelf, dust thick on the lid. I lifted it down and set it on the workbench Tristan had built the year Corvus started kindergarten. My hands were steadier than I expected them to be. Inside, under the socket wrenches and a coffee can of loose screws, I found an envelope. Cream-colored. Gone soft to the corners the way paper does when it's been handled and put back many times. My name was on the front in Tristan's handwriting, the same careful print he used on every invoice he ever wrote. Under the envelope was a small green ledger, the kind you'd buy at a hardware store for tracking job costs. And under that, wrapped in a shop rag, the compass. His compass. The one I hadn't seen in months. I opened the ledger first. rows of numbers in Tristan's hand, going back 11 years, not job costs. Loans. Amounts he'd given Corvus quietly over more than a decade, each one dated, each one noted with a short phrase. Truck repair. Rent, months behind. Car debt, told him last time. The last entry was dated 4 months before Tristan died. Told him no. First time. I sat down on the workbench stool. I did not cry. I read it twice. Then I opened the letter. My hands were steady until the second line, and then they were not. Thea, if you're reading this, I've been gone a while and you finally got around to the toolbox. I always knew you would, in your own time. I never told you how much I gave Corvus over the years because I didn't want you carrying it the way I carried it. I loved that boy every day of his life, and I also watched him learn that somebody would always catch him. I stopped catching him the last year. I told him no, and it about killed me to do it. I think there's more trouble coming that he hasn't told either of us about. If you're reading this and something's gone sideways with money, or with the house, or with that girl he married, don't let your good heart make the same mistake mine did. Write it down. Keep the compass close. It always pointed true, same as you. I set the letter down on the workbench. Outside, I could hear a car pull into the driveway. Corvus's truck. I did not go to the door right away. I sat with the ledger open in front of me, 11 years of numbers, and I understood for the first time the exact shape of what my son had been hiding and how long he'd been hiding it, and how many chances his father had quietly given him before deciding, 4 months before he died, that the giving had to stop. I put the compass in my sweater pocket. I put the letter and the ledger back in the toolbox, closed the lid, and locked it again with my own hand. Then I went to answer the door because whatever was coming, I intended to meet it with my face still. What I didn't know yet was that Corvus hadn't come to talk about the guest room at all. Corvus stood on the porch with his phone still in his hand, and something in his face had already come apart before he said a word. "Mom, I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to not hate me before I finish." I let him in. I did not offer coffee this time. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd told me about the guest room 2 days before, and he put his phone face down in front of him like it had bitten him. "I owe money," he said. "A lot of it, to a guy named Malachi Pharaoh. It started as a bad bet 3 years ago, and I thought I could get ahead of it, and instead, I just got further behind." I already knew the name. I let him say it anyway. Sometimes a person needs to hear their own confession out loud before it becomes real to them. "How much?" I said. He told me. It was more than I expected and less than I feared, which is its own strange kind of relief. "Lilith doesn't know the full amount," he said. "She knows there's a debt. She thinks it's smaller than it is. I told her if we could get some equity out of the house, out of your house, we could handle it quietly before the baby came and nobody would ever have to know how close it got." "That's why the guest room," I said. "It wasn't a question." He nodded, and he couldn't look at me while he did it. "I texted her the wrong thread," he said. "This morning. I meant to send her the numbers, the real numbers, so she'd finally understand how bad it was. I sent it to you instead." He turned his phone over and slid it across the table. There it was, a message meant for his wife laid out plain as anything. Full balance owed to M. Farrow. A rough plan involving my house. And one line near the bottom that stopped my breath for a moment. "If Mom moves to the small room now, it's easier to talk about selling later. Don't push it yet." I looked at that line a long time. "Your father knew," I said finally. "He knew about Furrow before he died. He wrote it in a ledger. He told me no more, 4 months before he passed, and he never told me why." Corvus's face went the color of the porch rail in winter. "He knew," he repeated, like the words didn't fit in his mouth. "He kept a record of every dollar he gave you for 11 years, I said, and a letter for me in case something like this ever happened. Your father saw this coming a long time before either of us did, Corvus. He just didn't live long enough to finish the conversation." I set the compass on the table between us. Corvus stared at it like he was seeing a ghost. "I forgot he even had that," he said quietly. "You tried the shed lock," I said. "It wasn't a question either. The hasps got fresh scratches on it." He didn't deny it. "I was looking for anything I could sell before you noticed it was gone. I'm not proud of it." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, somewhere down the block, somebody was running a leaf blower, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the ordinary world kept making its ordinary noise while mine had just come apart and started to reassemble itself into something else. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not angry," I said. "But I'm angrier at the plan than I am at the debt. A man can end up owing money to the wrong kind of person. That happens. What happens next is what tells me who you are." "What happens next," he said, "is up to you. I know that." I picked the compass back up and held it in my palm, the way Tristan used to before a job, checking it out of habit even when he already knew which way was north. Go home, I told my son. Tell Lilith you sent that text to the wrong person. Tell her everything, the real number, not the small one. And then the two of you come back here Sunday, and we'll figure out what happens to this family with the truth sitting on the table instead of a ledger hidden in a shed. He stood up slower than a man his age should have to. At the door, he stopped. Mom, I wasn't trying to steal from you. I was trying to fix something I broke, and I picked the worst possible way to do it. I know, I said. That's the part I'm still deciding what to do with. He left. I stood in my kitchen a long while after his truck pulled away, holding a compass that had outlived the man who carried it, thinking about 11 years of quiet loans and one letter that had waited patiently in a red toolbox for exactly this Tuesday. Sunday came slow, the way important days do when you've spent the days before them rehearsing what you'll say and knowing you'll say something else entirely once the moment arrives. I called Peregrine Doyle first thing Friday morning. Peregrine had drawn up my will 15 years ago, and Tristan's before that, and he still kept an office on Danbury Street 2 doors down from the one I'd worked in for 3 decades. Thea, he said, when I told him I needed an hour of his time and it couldn't wait. You sound like a woman who found something in a shed. I did, I said, a ledger, a letter, and a debt I didn't know my son had. I sat across his desk that afternoon and told him everything. The scratched hasp, the 11 years of loans Tristan had tracked and never mentioned, the wrong number text with my name in it. Peregrine listened the way he always had, without interrupting, and when I finished, he set his pen down. You have 3 questions in front of you, he said, whether to help him with the debt, whether to protect the house from ever being used as collateral for it, and whether to do both in a way that teaches him something instead of just rescuing him again. That's the one I keep circling, I said. Your father's habit solved the first 2 problems 11 years at a time, and it never once solved the third. No, Peregrine agreed. It didn't. He walked me through what an irrevocable trust could do, one that held the house itself so it could never again be dangled as an answer to somebody else's bad debt. He explained it plainly, no jargon, just weight and support and what happens if you remove the wrong piece. I can have the paperwork ready by Monday, he said. But Thea, however this Sunday dinner goes, that trust protects the house whether Corvus makes things right or doesn't. It isn't a punishment. It's just true north. I thought of the compass in my sweater pocket and almost smiled at that. I spent Saturday doing the part that mattered more than any document. I drove to see an associate of Malachi Farrows, a man Peregrine knew through the courthouse, not to negotiate anything, only to understand exactly what kind of debt this was and whether it required real caution. I came home with a plain answer. It was ugly and overdue, but an ordinary debt, the kind that responds to a payment plan and a signature, not the kind that follows a family home at night. That eased something in my chest I hadn't realized was still clenched. Sunday morning, I made the pot roast because some conversations go easier with a full stomach and something to do with your hands. Corvus and Lilith arrived at 4, and Lilith looked at me careful and small in a way I hadn't seen from her before. Not performance this time, something closer to fear. We ate first. I insisted on that. You don't do hard things on an empty stomach, and I wanted no one able to say afterward they'd been ambushed. When the plates were cleared, I brought the toolbox in from the truck and set it on the table between us, the way you'd set down evidence, because that is exactly what it was. Before anything else gets decided today, I said, I want you both to see what your father left me, Corvus. Not told, left, in writing. I opened the lid. I set the ledger down first and let it sit there a moment before I spoke. 11 years of loans, I said. Every dollar your father gave you, dated and noted, right up until 4 months before he died, when he wrote told him no, first time. He never told me about a single one of these while he was alive. He carried it alone because he didn't want me carrying it too. Corvus's hands were flat on the table, and he didn't reach for the ledger. He didn't need to. He already knew what was in it better than I did. I set the letter down next and read the middle of it aloud, the part about catching him, the part about writing it down. Lilith's eyes were wet by the second line. Corvus didn't try to stop his. He knew about the trouble coming, I said. He just didn't live long enough to see what shape it would take. It took the shape of a text message sent to the wrong person and a guest room offered 2 days before he finally told me the truth. I set the compass down last, in the middle of the table, between the two of them. Your father carried this every day of his working life, I said to Corvus. He told me once it always pointed true, same as I did. I think he'd want you to have it now, not as a reward, as a reminder of the direction he was trying to point you in for 11 years. Corvus picked it up. He held it the way you hold something you're afraid might not be real. I have decided some things, I said before either of them could speak. First, I'm meeting with Pharaoh's people through Peregrine this week, and I'll co sign a payment plan for half the debt. Half, Corvus. Not all of it. You will carry the rest yourself on a schedule you keep to, because a debt that costs you nothing teaches you nothing. Second, the house goes into a trust starting Monday. It will never again be something anyone can dangle in front of a man collecting on a bad bet, including you. Not because I don't trust you today, because I won't be caught unprepared by this family twice. Third, I looked at Lilith. The guest room conversation is over. Nobody in this house is moving anybody out of anything. You're having a baby in 2 months, and that baby is going to need a family that tells each other the truth before the crisis, not after it. Lilith's voice, when it came, was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I didn't know about the debt, not the real number. I knew there was something, and I let myself believe it was small because small was easier to carry. I understand that, I said. I did the same thing with the scratch padlock for longer than I should have. Corvus closed his hand around the compass. I don't know how to thank you for this and apologize for the guest room in the same sentence, he said. So I'm not going to try. I'm just going to do the payments, and I'm going to tell Lilith everything, all of it tonight. That's the whole job, I said. Not the sentence, the doing. We sat a while longer, the three of us, the toolbox open between us like something finally allowed to breathe after 14 months shut in a shed. Outside, the light was going gold the way it does in late afternoon, and I thought about Tristan and 11 years of quiet ledger entries and how a dying man's last careful sentence had turned out to be the truest direction he'd ever given any of us. 3 months later, the trust is signed and recorded, and this house has exactly one name on the deed that matters. Mine, sitting behind a wall no crisis will ever be able to shake loose again. Corvus made his first payment to Pharaoh's people the week after that Sunday dinner, and every month since. He carries his father's old tape measure on his keyring now, next to nothing else. And he told me once he keeps it there on purpose, so he has to look at it every time he reaches for his keys. Lilith and I will never be the kind of close some mothers and daughters-in-law manage. But she called me the week after the trust closed and asked, in a voice with no performance left in it, if I'd help her pick out a crib that didn't need a magazine spread to feel like love. We picked a plain one, second-hand, sturdy. She cried a little in the store, and I let her, because sometimes that's the whole job of being family. You let them cry, and you don't rush it. My grandson came on a gray Tuesday in March, furious about the whole business, with his father's exact frown. The first time they put him in my arms, I had to sit down. I whispered to him the same thing I say to Tristan some mornings on my porch. We've been saving up for you a long time, Willow Man. I gave Corvus his father's compass that Sunday, and I haven't taken it back. He keeps it in the truck now, in the cup holder, where he says he sees it every time he's tempted to take the easy road instead of the honest one. He isn't perfect at it. Nobody ever is. But he's doing it on purpose now, and that's new, and I am proud of him in a way I didn't expect to feel again this soon after burying his father. People ask me sometimes whether I was too hard on him, taking half the debt off his shoulders but making him stand under the rest of it alone. I tell them the truth. Catching it every time is exactly how we all ended up sitting around a kitchen table with a wrong number text message and a scratched padlock between us. A debt that costs a man nothing teaches him nothing. My husband learned that 11 years too late to say it out loud. I wasn't going to make the same mistake with the time I have left. If there's one thing I'd hand you, it's this. Write it down. Every loan, every promise, every quiet thing you're carrying so someone else doesn't have to. Not because you don't trust the people you love. Because love without a record is just a story somebody else gets to rewrite later, and you deserve better than being edited out of your own kindness. My husband kept a ledger for 11 years, so that one day in the shed on an ordinary Tuesday, I would finally understand exactly what I was looking at. Write it down. Keep the compass close. It always points true. That's my story. One toolbox, one letter, one steady no, that finally became a yes worth having.